I'm standing in the heart of Tehran, and for the first time in my life, the air doesn't just feel heavy with smog, it feels heavy with the scent of an ending. You've seen the headlines, the grainy footage of flickering fires, and the distant sound of chanting, but being here is different. It's the silence between the sirens that's the most terrifying. People are no longer asking if the regime will change, they are asking what will be left of us when it finally shatters. Welcome to the front lines of a survival war that has moved from the history books into our living rooms. This isn't just about politics anymore. It's about a nation teetering on a razor's edge. Is the Islamic Republic executing a masterclass in survival? Or are we watching the final desperate gasps of a system that has run out of time? To understand if the regime is truly winning or facing a total collapse, we have to look at the cracks that started appearing where no one expected them. It didn't start with a foreign invasion. It started with the currency. Imagine waking up and finding out your life savings can't even buy you a week's worth of bread. In early 2026, the rial didn't just drop, it vanished. And when the money disappeared, the fear that usually keeps people quiet disappeared with it. I watched as my neighbors, people who had spent decades keeping their heads down, walked into the streets. This wasn't the usual student protest. These were grandfathers, shopkeepers, and even off-duty officers. The economy was the first pillar to crumble, and as the axis of resistance began to fray under external strikes, the regime realized they weren't just fighting a shadow war with the West, they were fighting a ghost in their own hallways. The question is, when the state loses its ability to feed its people, does it lose its soul, or does it just sharpen its teeth? As the economic floor dropped out from under us, the regime didn't retreat, they doubled down. I remember walking past the Revolutionary Guard barracks and seeing the shift in their eyes. It wasn't the look of a confident protector anymore, it was the look of a cornered predator. This is where the survival war gets dark. While the streets were screaming for bread, the leadership was pivoting to a strategy of absolute digital and physical isolation. They call it the National Information Network. But to us, it's a digital iron curtain. One night, the internet just died. No WhatsApp, no Instagram, no way to tell the world what was happening. In that darkness, the arrests accelerated. They started targeting the influencers, the thinkers, the people who provided the why behind the how of our anger. But here is the twist that the world missed. The regime began to cannibalize its own. To pay the loyalists, they started seizing the assets of the less loyal elites. I saw luxury villas in North Tehran being raided by the very same men who used to guard them. This isn't just a crackdown on protesters, it's a civil war within the establishment. When the circle of trust gets smaller, the paranoia grows. They are trying to prove they can survive by turning Iran into a fortress, disconnected from the global banking system and the global conversation. They're betting that if they can hold out long enough, the world will get bored and look away. But can you really run a modern country like a 14th century citadel? The cracks aren't just in the walls anymore. They're in the foundation. Then came the moment that changed everything, the moment the myth of the regime's untouchable defense finally shattered. For years we were told that the shadow war with our rivals was something happening far away, in the deserts of Syria or the mountains of Lebanon. But one Tuesday afternoon, the sky over Tehran didn't look like ours anymore. It was filled with the low, rhythmic hum of sophisticated drones that didn't belong to the Revolutionary Guard. The state media scrambled, calling it a minor technical glitch, but we saw the smoke rising from the military complexes on the outskirts of the city. The regime's axis of resistance was supposed to be a shield, a way to keep the fight off Iranian soil. Instead, it became a magnet, drawing the fire directly into our backyards. I stood on my balcony and realized that the wall of deterrence hadn't just cracked, it had dissolved. This is the regime's nightmare scenario. They are losing the strategic depth they spent 40 years and billions of dollars building. Every dollar sent to a militia abroad is a dollar that isn't silencing a hungry citizen at home. The trade-off has become impossible to manage. I spoke to a veteran of the Iran-Iraq War, a man covered in scars who had always been a staunch supporter of the system. He looked at the plumes of smoke and whispered, "We are protecting the borders while the house is on fire." When the military can no longer guarantee safety and the government can no longer guarantee food, the contract between the ruler and the ruled is officially dead. The regime is now leaning entirely on the only thing they have left, raw, unfiltered force. But as history teaches us, you can build a throne out of bayonets. but you can't sit on it for very long. Now we've reached the tipping point, the stage where the fear of the regime is finally being outweighed by the fear of a future under them. I've seen it. In the eyes of the youth. They aren't just protesting anymore, they are reinventing what it means to be Iranian. There's a secret underground network that's bypassed the digital blackout, sharing news through mesh networks and old-school hand-to-hand communication. It's like a second invisible country is growing right underneath the feet of the clerics. The regime's response to this has been a frantic attempt to find a successor, a strong man who can bridge the gap between the old guard and the angry new generation. But how do you find a face for a system that everyone is trying to unmask? The internal whispers are getting louder. I've heard rumors of mid-level officials quietly moving their families out of the country, shifting gold and assets to Turkey or Dubai. When the rats start leaving the ship, you know the hull has been breached. The survival war has turned into a waiting game. The regime is betting on a great exhaustion, hoping we get too tired, too hungry, or too scared to keep going. But what they don't understand is that you can't exhaust a person who has nothing left to lose. We are witnessing a psychological collapse. The slogans that used to roar through the streets during state holidays now sound hollow, like a recording played in an empty theater. The world watches the maps and the missile counts, but the real war is happening in the quiet defiance of a woman walking without a veil, or a shopkeeper refusing to accept the state-mandated price. This is the final stand, not because of a foreign bomb, but because the internal logic of the regime no longer computes. They are fighting for a version of Iran that simply doesn't exist anymore. So, where does this leave us? Is the regime winning the war for survival, or are we witnessing the final collapse? If you look at the maps, they still hold the buildings. If you look at the ledgers, they still control the oil. But if you look into the streets, you see the truth. Power without authority is just a countdown. The regime might survive this month or even this year through sheer brutality. They can keep the lights off and the prisons full, but a government that treats its own citizens like an occupying army is already dead. It just hasn't fallen over yet. They are winning the battles, but they've already lost the nation. I look at the kids in my neighborhood, the ones who have never known a day of freedom, and I see a fire in them that no water cannon can douse. They aren't waiting for a hero from the west or a savior from the sky. They are waiting for the moment the regime's shadow finally shrinks back into the darkness. This is Iran's final stand, not a bang, not a sudden explosion, but a slow, grinding realization that the past can no longer hold the future hostage. The regime is fighting for its life, but we are fighting for our souls. And in a war like that, the side with the most heart always outlasts the side with the most guns. The end isn't just coming, it's already here, whispered in every alleyway and written on every wall. The only thing left to see is who will be standing when the dust finally settles. The endgame of any regime isn't marked by the day the palace falls, but by the day the people stop being afraid of the palace. I walked past a wall yesterday where someone had painted over a government slogan with just 2 words, "Our turn." It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. The regime's final strategy is to convince the world, and us, that the alternative to their rule is total chaos, a Syrian-style collapse that would burn the region to the ground. They want us to believe that they are the only thing standing between Iran and the abyss. But as I look around, I realize that for millions of us, the abyss is already here. We've lived in it for decades. The chaos they threaten us with is nothing compared to the organized destruction of our dreams, our economy, and our youth. We are now in the gray zone of revolution. This is the period where the state still looks strong on paper, but the soldiers are hesitating before they pull the trigger, and the bureaucrats are losing the paperwork. I saw a riot policeman share his water bottle with a protester last week when he thought the cameras weren't looking. That small act of humanity is a crack in the armor that no amount of propaganda can weld shut. Whether the regime survives this specific crisis or not is almost irrelevant now. The survival war has been lost because they have lost the consent of the governed. They are a ghost ship, still sailing by momentum, but with no one left at the wheel who truly believes in the destination. The collapse is no longer a if, it is a when. And when that day comes, it won't be because of a foreign power. It will be because the people of Iran decided that the weight of the past was finally too heavy to carry into the future. Behind the closed doors of the power corridors, the panic is palpable. My cousin, who works in a government ministry, told me they aren't even filing reports anymore. They're shredding them. The regime is no longer trying to govern. They are trying to hide. They are liquidating assets, moving gold to offshore accounts, and preparing for the day the gates finally give way. This is the stage where the mask of divine authority falls off, revealing nothing but a group of frightened men, clutching onto a sinking ship. But the most dangerous part of a dying regime is its final attempt to provoke a war. I've heard the rumors spreading through the bazaars. The leadership thinks a massive external conflict, a direct strike against a regional rival, is the only way to force the Iranian people back into a state of patriotic unity. They want a war with the world because they are losing the war with their own people. They think that if bombs start falling from foreign planes, we will forget that they are the ones who emptied our plates and silenced our voices. But they've miscalculated. For the first time, the people aren't buying the foreign enemy narrative. When the state-run TV blares warnings of external threats, people just turn the volume down and continue talking about the price of eggs. The regime is shouting into a vacuum. Their greatest weapon, fear of the other, has been neutralized by the reality of our daily suffering. We are standing in the eye of the storm. It's strangely calm, but the pressure is building to an intensity that the structures of 1979 simply weren't built to withstand. The survival war has reached the point of no return. You can't negotiate with a ghost, and you can't feed a nation with ideology. The silence in the halls of power is now being replaced by the sound of bags being packed. My contact near the airport tells me the private jet terminal hasn't been this busy in 40 years. These aren't diplomats traveling for peace talks. These are the architects of the survival war, looking for an exit strategy. It's the ultimate irony. The men who preach martyrdom for decades are the first ones reaching for their passports when the bill finally comes due. The regime is currently trying to play its last card, a forced national reconciliation that feels more like a hostage negotiation. They're offering minor concessions, releasing a few high-profile prisoners, and promising economic reforms that they know they can't fund. But it's too little, too late. You can't fix a shattered vase with a piece of tape, and you can't win back a generation that you've spent their entire lives trying to break. I walked past a group of teenagers yesterday who were openly mocking the morality police. They weren't running, they weren't hiding, they were laughing. That laughter is the most revolutionary sound I've ever heard. It's the sound of a system losing its awe. Once a dictatorship becomes a joke, it has already lost the war. The guns might still be loaded, but the authority behind them has turned to dust. The final stand isn't a single battle. It's a million small defections. It's the soldier who looks the other way, the banker who leaks the corruption files, and the mother who tells her son that he doesn't have to die for a cause he doesn't believe in. The regime is winning the survival war on paper, but they are facing total collapse in the hearts of the people. The air in the streets has shifted from the smell of burning tires to something even more potent, the scent of a new beginning. I walked past the university gates today, and the slogans weren't just about what we hate anymore. They were about what we want to build. This is the ultimate failure of the survival war. The regime spent 40 years telling us who to fear, but they forgot to give us a reason to hope. Now, that hope has become their greatest enemy. I see the high-ranking officials on the state news, their voices cracking as they plead for national unity against a world they claim is out to get us. But the camera doesn't show the empty chairs behind them or the way their own security detail looks at them with suspicion. The desertion isn't just happening in the streets, it's happening in the minds of the men who were supposed to pull the trigger. When the enforcers start wondering if they'll be held accountable by the very people they're supposed to suppress, the regime's final stand becomes a house of cards in a hurricane. The regime is currently trapped in a loop of its own making. They can't reform without losing control, and they can't use more force without sparking a total explosion. They are paralyzed by the ghost of their own history. Every move they make to save themselves only pulls the knot tighter. I looked at an old photo of Tehran from the 70s, and then I looked at the city today. We've been living in a time capsule, frozen by a leadership that was terrified of the future. But the future has finally arrived, and it's not asking for permission. We are standing at the edge of the map. There are no more precedents for what happens next. The survival war is over because there is nothing left for them to win. They can occupy the land, but they can no longer occupy the Iranian mind. The total collapse isn't a falling building, it's a falling curtain. And as it falls, the light is finally starting to hit the stage. In the quiet corners of the city, the whispers have turned into a countdown. I sat in a small tea house yesterday, and for the first time, nobody lowered their voice when the name of the supreme leader was mentioned. That's the moment you realize the survival war has been lost, not on a battlefield, but in the minds of the people. When a regime loses the ability to inspire fear, they lose the ability to govern. The state is currently trying to manufacture a controlled collapse, a way to step back just enough to save their own necks while keeping the system intact. They are looking for a scapegoat, someone within their own ranks to blame for the economic ruin and the blood on the streets. I've seen the internal memos leaked online. They are terrified that the rank-and-file soldiers will join us. They are terrified that the very hands they trained to protect them will be the ones to open the prison gates. This is the final stand because there are no more cards left to play. They've tried the crackdowns, they've tried the blackouts, and they've tried the foreign distractions. But the hunger doesn't go away, and the memory of those we've lost doesn't fade. I looked at a mural of a martyr from the old war, and someone had spray-painted a simple question over it. For what? The regime is winning the survival war in the sense that they are still breathing, but they are facing total collapse in the sense that they no longer have a country to lead. They are rulers of a ghost nation, kings of an empty shell. Every day they stay in power is just another day added to the debt they will eventually have to pay. The transition from winning to collapsing doesn't happen with a roar. It happens with the steady, quiet crumbling of the pillars that once held them up. This is the stage of the conflict where the regime realizes that their greatest threat isn't a drone from the west or a carrier in the Gulf. It's the clock. Time is the one thing they can't arrest, and it's running out. I've noticed that the evening news has stopped talking about the future entirely. They only talk about the past, clinging to the glories of 1979 like a drowning man clutching a heavy stone. They are living in a museum of their own making, while the rest of us are ready to step out into the sun. I met a young girl today who was selling flowers near the square. She told me she doesn't watch the news anymore because she doesn't speak that language. That hit me harder than any political analysis. The regime is literally speaking a dead language to a living nation. They are trying to solve 21st century hunger with 7th century rhetoric. The disconnect is so absolute that it has become a physical wall. Even the hardliners are starting to look tired. I saw a group of Basij members sitting on a curb, their helmets off, looking at their phones with the same look of exhaustion and defeat as the people they were sent to disperse. When the enforcers start to see themselves in the faces of the protesters, the survival war is effectively over. You cannot sustain a dictatorship on the shoulders of men who are starting to wake up. We are watching the slow-motion disintegration of a power structure that thought it was eternal. They are winning the survival war only in the way a terminal patient wins another hour of breath. It's not victory, it's just a delay. The total collapse is no longer an event we are waiting for. It's a process we are living through. The old Iran is already gone. We're just waiting for the wreckage to be cleared so we can see what's underneath. The most chilling part of this final stand is the sudden realization that the regime has become a prisoner of its own walls. They spent billions building a fortress to keep the world out, only to realize they've locked themselves in with a population that no longer recognizes them. I saw a high-ranking official's motorcade stuck in traffic yesterday, and instead of the usual fear, people just stared. No one moved their cars. No one cleared the way. It was a silent, collective refusal to acknowledge his existence. That's when I knew. The regime hasn't just lost the war. They've lost the reality. They are currently trying to pivot toward a new deal with the East, hoping that foreign investments from allies will act as a life support system. But money can't buy back the dignity of a mother who lost her child to a protest, and it can't fix the soul of a nation that has been gaslit for half a century. The survival war has reached its logical conclusion. You can keep a heart beating with a machine, but you can't make it love you. As the sun sets over the Alborz Mountains, the city lights flicker, a reminder of the crumbling infrastructure the government can no longer maintain. Each blackout is a symbol of their fading grip. They are winning the survival war in the headlines they write for themselves, but they are facing total collapse in the lives we lead. The regime is a shadow that is growing longer only because the sun is finally going down on their era. We aren't just watching the end of a government, we are watching the birth of a country that has been waiting in the wings for far too long. The final stand isn't about their survival anymore, it's about ours. And as I look at the faces around me, I see a nation that has already decided to survive, with or without them. There's a specific kind of stillness that comes right before a storm breaks. A quiet so intense it rings in your ears. That's where we are right now. I walked past a local mosque today, a place that used to be the heartbeat of the regime's influence, and it was nearly empty. The few people there weren't listening to the sermon, they were staring at their hands. The ideology that once fueled this entire system has evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a cold, mechanical bureaucracy that survives only because it doesn't know how to stop. The regime is currently attempting one last desperate gamble, a managed instability. They are intentionally creating small-scale crises, hoping to keep us so distracted by survival that we forget to demand change. But they've underestimated the collective memory of this land. We remember every broken promise, every diverted fund, and every voice that was silenced. You can't use a crisis to control a people who have been forged in the fires of constant crisis. We've become fireproof. I see the internal reports being leaked, ministers arguing with generals, clerics pleading with economists. The survival war has turned into a blame game. Everyone is looking for someone else to hold the bag when the music finally stops. This is how empires end, not always with a giant explosion, but with a series of small, panicky decisions made by men who are more afraid of their own shadows than they are of the enemy they've spent decades inventing. Winning or losing? The question itself feels outdated. The regime is winning the battle for the physical space, but they have lost the battle for the Iranian future. They are like a landlord who still holds the deed to a house that has already been reclaimed by the forest. The collapse isn't coming. It has settled into the very foundation of the buildings. We are just waiting for the first gust of wind to show the world what we already know. The regime's final strategy is perhaps the most desperate of all, the attempt to rewrite our identity. They are flooding the airwaves with a new kind of nationalism, trying to wrap themselves in the Persian flag because the religious one has lost its pull. I see the billboards changing overnight, trading slogans of martyrdom for images of ancient glory. But you can't hide a secret police state behind a coat of nationalist paint. We know who they are, and more importantly, they know that we know. I spent the evening talking to a retired teacher who has seen 3 different versions of Iran in his lifetime. He told me that a regime is like a dam. It looks indestructible right up until the second it vanishes. The water doesn't break the dam because it's angry, he said, watching the sunset over the dry riverbed. It breaks it because it's inevitable. That is the state of the survival war in 2026. It's not about anger anymore. It's about the sheer gravitational force of a nation that has outgrown its cage. The state's grip is now so tight that it's starting to crush the very things it needs to survive. By silencing the experts, they've blinded their own eyes. By purging the doubters, they've emptied their own heads. They are winning the survival war in a vacuum, ruling over a silence they mistook for peace. But that silence is actually a fuse. We are living in the final chapter of a book that was written in a language no one speaks anymore. The regime is facing a total collapse, not because of an external force, but because they have become a foreign body inside their own country. They are an island of the past in a sea of the future, and the tide is coming in. I am ready for the final part whenever you are, or we can continue if you have more ground to cover.